Early Breakfast with Rosie Wright on Times Radio with MHR, the HR, payroll and finance software empowering your team. Find out more at mhrglobal.com.
It's 19 minutes past 5. Front page of the Times says the Prime Minister won't back the EU in that trade war, as we've just been discussing with Joe Mays. But the other story is the NHS refusing to publish a full report exposing failings in the treatment of the paranoid schizophrenic who killed 3 people in Nottingham because of problems over patient confidentiality. Of course, that was Barnaby Welber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and also Ian Coates, who were fatally stabbed by Valdo Calacane. Paranoid schizophrenic. There'll be much more interrogating this story on Times Radio Breakfast a little bit later. The Daily Mail says, what a time to be crawling back to the EU as Trump threatens a trade war, but hints at sparing the UK. Starmer begs Brussels for closer ties. The Guardian says Starmer faces a Labour revolt over the backing for an oil field. And the Mirror has got a fantastic photograph of the Princess of Wales saying, get back to nature, talking about World Cancer Day. She posted a picture that had been taken by her son, who's just 6, with words to inspire us all. A new sort of AI breast screening trial is being announced by Wes Streeting today. We'll find out a little bit more. Andrew Eborn, the broadcaster, barrister and president of Octopus TV, is here. Andrew, good morning.
Good morning, Rosie. Always a delight to join you.
A political story we haven't talked about very much this week, just because there has been so much going on. Looking inside the Sun, this is the movements of Keir Starmer's voice coach, who it's reported to have travelled. Remembered the time of all these COVID rules, 50 miles between COVID lockdown tiers to meet him on Christmas Eve. I mean, when you hear these stories, there are a couple of things. First of all, we think, were any rules broken? And second of all, Andrew, if they were, what repercussions should that mean or entail for the Prime Minister?
Oh, absolutely. And it's the screaming of hypocrisy if there were rules broken. And you remember all the grief that various others got, including Boris, about travelling and various and so on and so forth. So this particular story, his personal voice coach is what it's alleged, travelled more than 50 miles between lockdown to meet him while stay-at-home orders were in place. And you'll remember that London was basically what was called Tier 4, which meant you must stay at home and only travel for work, education or other legally permitted reasons. And apparently this voice coach, Leonie Mellinger, was in Brighton, which was a Tier 3. And basically, if you're in Tier 3, you mustn't enter Tier 4. So there are all sorts of questions to be asked. And indeed, those questions were asked of the Prime Minister, and he dodged them at the particular thing. He was asked if he broke the rules, and he said, of course not. Well, this does beggar all sorts of questions, and we've got to find out what the truth is. Did he get his voice coach? Was she coming basically to teach him how to speak proper? And if so, he's got to answer those questions.
Have we moved on from this, Andrew, or do you think actually this is more about integrity?
Well, it's totally about integrity, and especially when you come in on a platform saying we're going to be honest and integrity, get rid of all the rubbish of the past, and you call other people out. And I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and anybody who criticises anybody in politics has got to make sure that their own space is incredibly clean. They always say, look, remove the speck before you basically remove the plank from your own eye before you try to remove the speck of dust from somebody else's. And it's got to be true. He's got to deal with this. He's got to control the narrative, tell us exactly what happened. A voice coach travelling 50 miles during lockdown screams of hypocrisy. What's the true story? And he should deal with that very quickly.
Let's talk about reform. Andrew, to give you an idea of how split opinion is on this, Paul has messaged into saying, reform is just the Brexit party in disguise. We need to call it out for what it is. Brexit's caused real and lasting damage to the UK. Henry, though, WhatsApps to say, reform has my support for the main reasons to stop diversity, equality and inclusion policies, net zero and immigration. Reform have topped this poll, this YouGov poll, for the first time, Andrew. I wonder why you think that might be the case.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's a glorious picture in the Times of Nigel Farage celebrating as only Nigel can. So the YouGov survey puts Nigel Farage's party at 25%, which is 1 point ahead of Labour and 4 points ahead of the Conservative. I think, Rosie, that what it is, it's a backlash. People don't like Labour for all sorts of reasons. They feel a bit disappointed. Everything from taking away the heating allowances for pensioners to the farmers and so on and so forth. And it might probably a backlash against against both of those. Kemi Badenoch is trying to rebuild trust in the Conservatives. But in the meantime, it sort of seems to sort of vote for, look, we don't like either of the parties at the moment, so Nigel's Reform Party should be that. And we remember that in the general election, they got 14% of the vote, but only 5 seats, as opposed to Reform, who got 12% of the votes and 72 seats. So there's all sorts of questions to be asked as a result. A lot of people are sort of turning around and say, well, if Reform got together with the Conservatives again, then obviously they'll put them way ahead of Labour. And a number of people are sort of still saying that might, discussion should happen. And so let's see what happens on that sort of basis. But I do think it's a backlash against the other two parties, the Conservatives and Labour, not necessarily just in favour of Reform.
Yeah, and I can't see a merging of the Conservatives and of Reform. But, you never know. There's been so many political upheavals over the last few years. Ozempic, Andrew, there has going to be a change in the regulation. I think this is probably a good idea. I'm looking inside The Sun. Online, they call them fat jab sales, are going to be tightened up so that what's happening now is you can go to an online pharmacy, and The Times did some reporting about how easy it was to just sort of make up really details about what your BMI was and then get the injections delivered to your door. And pharmacists, doctors, I think the government as well have realised, actually, this means the wrong people in some cases are getting these jabs, and we need to change how they're prescribed.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the General Pharmaceutical Council said too many people are pretending to be obese online in order to get these drugs. And there's others apart from Ozempic. There's Wegovy and Mounjaro and so on and so forth. But these are high-risk medicines. And what they're saying is that need to tighten up. This should be for obese people, which is why they're saying to say, look, we're going to have video or face-to-face chats under mandatory new rules. And they also want to get access to medical records so they can limit the use of these jabs for people who are obese or with a body mass index above 30. And that's the general sort of proposition, because without those, there's a risk. And what these drugs do is basically suppress your appetite. But they're only as good, I would imagine, whilst you're on it. So it's probably a commitment for life. And I think you've got to look at that sort of basis. There are also side effects as well as there is with any sort of medicine. So they have to be very, very careful on that sort of premise.
Yeah, well, what's going to happen is more detailed checks will be put in place, more than just a form and a photograph. So the idea is to have to meet someone face to face before you get this prescribed. And lots of people have had real concerns about people with eating disorders and managing to get their hands on this. And then it becomes much easier to deprive yourself from food if you have a condition like that. Something that's caused a lot of debate. Front page of the Mail, lots of the papers talking about this. The Times have got a sort of a very lengthy analysis piece here on how strong the evidence is against Lucy Letby. A report challenging her conviction is going to be released later on today. And I wonder, Andrew, with your sort of legal hat on, how much nervousness you have around this case?
Well, I think what happens, there's an incredibly high bar which needs to be done. It's now, we've had appeals already looking at this sort of stuff. It's absolutely right. First of all, it's a horrendous case. If somebody is wrongly convicted, then it's absolutely right that people look at the evidence and make sure that makes sense. That has already been done. So they now basically, 2 juries have found Letby guilty of murdering 7 babies and harming 8 others. 3 appeal court judges have reviewed a multitude of strands of evidence against her. Now, the only option that remains is for the case to be looked at by what's called the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And the bar is very, very high. They have to look at really new evidence to see, has there been a miscarriage of justice? And one of the relevant people there, Lee, a Canadian neonatologist, is the co-author of a 1989 paper that featured in the prosecution's case against Letby. And they looked at about the effects of what's called the air embolism, in which basically air bubbles enter the bloodstream and cause a blockage in newborn babies. And so that's what they're trying to look at. They need to pass this incredibly high bar. Is this new evidence that means that the convictions are unsafe? And as a result, they need to basically be reviewed.
Yeah, we don't know what that new evidence is yet. We're expecting it to be published a little bit later on today. And of course, we'll bring you the latest when that comes out. Let's end on something a little bit lighter, I think, Andrew. Bridget Jones, the premiere, I think, was last week. This franchise that just keeps rolling and rolling, it seems, to much applause. Bridget Jones, famously not a domestic goddess, so says The Times this morning. Her culinary triumphs include making a simple leek and potato soup go blue, turning marmalade pudding into a lumpy, wretched mess, and failing to make an omelette. what the paper says is there's actually been a resurgence in sort of 90s favourites food, and that Bridget Jones could have something to do with it.
Oh, absolutely. Nostalgia ain't what it used to be. That's what they say. So exactly. And this has been commissioned. The report has come out by a major retailer, Waitrose in this instance. And they're saying that basically there's been a surge, a 233% increase in searches for leek and potato soup. And orange marmalade also featured in the Bridget Jones things, up by 553%. So what's happening is people love these sort of stuff. And things like turkey curry, you might remember, plays an important role in the first film. It's the dish over which Bridget Jones and Mark Darcy, played by Colin Firth, have their first awkward yet fateful first meeting. So recipe searches for the turkey curry have basically gone up 200%. This is what's happening, and it shows the power of these fantastic franchises and how that can have an impact. When you're talking about celebrity endorsements, as you know, I get involved with a lot of that sort of stuff because it does influence the minds and indeed the hearts of people and indeed the stomachs, if you understand this report.
OK, if it's sort of knickknacks or pot noodle or club biscuits, Andrew, what is the 90s food you feel nostalgic about?
Oh, I tell you, I used to love a club. You get a thicker bit of chocolate on your club. I think there's a song there somewhere. I wasn't a fan of wagon wheels, although they don't feature in it.
Oh, yeah, they were dreadful.
Chardonnay. I think a good penchant for Chardonnay, which is what Bridget Jones likes as well. I think the sales of the citrusy white are also rising in recent weeks.
Yes, back in vogue. Andrew, thank you so much. Andrew, you won't go through the papers with me this morning.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.